Well, thank you for coming back tonight. The lesson that I'm going to do tonight is the lesson that I said I was not going to do. I was going to do a supplement so that I didn't have to drag you through it, but here's the deal. Two things. I just thought, I can't escape this. If we're going to do this study, then we need to do it right. And it doesn't mean that we have to just read every single word that's found throughout the Bible, but this is just one of those things where you need to know something about these words. And I'll try tonight to show you at least twice why this is important. So there's that. It's just one of those things that we have to do. If we're going to talk about this subject, we have to do this. Another thing, though, is this is one of the reasons why I love Sunday night services. It's totally like a judgment call. But if you don't have Sunday night where you can dig into things just a little bit meatier, I don't know when you get this kind of stuff. I can't do this lesson on Sunday morning. And so tonight we're going to dig in just a little bit more in a way that probably we wouldn't be allowed. I'd be allowed to. It just nobody would ever come back again after that. So I'm going to start with this. This is a quote. In concluding this brief article, I would like to emphasize 2 points. First, it is important to try to understand the biblical text in the context in which it was written. Before we ask, what does the biblical text mean for us today, we must ask, what did it mean to them originally? We should do that in every aspect of our Bible study, not just this one. And so if you want like a general idea for what this lesson is, I would write this. Context matters. Context matters. We don't just find a word in the Bible and say, oh, hey, look at that. Whenever you read through the New Testament, you see these Christians in Corinth speaking in tongues. And so, look, they're speaking in tongues in the Bible, and so Christians today speak in tongues. And you say, no, context matters. You have to read it in the context. And so the same thing is true with this. So context. What is the context that the Bible was written in? We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. Probably it fits into like the genre of historical context. But then second, at the bottom part of this quote, there's a striking difference between the drinking of alcoholic beverages today and the drinking of wine in the New Testament times. This lesson and the next lesson that I do is going to focus in on that last sentence. The striking difference between what we read about in the Bible versus what we have on the shelves at Walmart and Quick Trip today that you go to pick up if you want to drink alcohol today. I want to tell you something else, just my nature, to know why we're doing this. You're going to sit there tonight. No, I'm not allowed. Becky said I'm not allowed to start the sermon with this is going to be boring. It's going to be exhilarating. That's the word I'm looking for. One time when I was in school, I got in trouble not in trouble, you don't get in trouble like that. I really irritated badly my advisor because we had a guest speaker come from Creighton. His name was Bruce Molina, and he's a big name in biblical studies. And he wrote this book called The New Testament World, and it was a New Testament class, and he came and he did this talk. And I read the book, and he did this talk, and I just sat there the whole time, and I raised my hand, and I said, cool, what you're saying, but how do you know that any of it's true? Like, how can I know that what you're saying is right? There's no footnotes in this book. There's no references, like, it's not true just because you say it. I didn't say it just like that, but that's the gist of what I said. And he seemed to enjoy the question and answered it just fine. But my advisor said, don't you ever do that to a guest speaker who comes here again. But that's what I want to do tonight is You don't just listen to what I say and say, wine is different in the Bible than what we have on the shelves at Quick Trip and Walmart today. When I say that, your job is to say, how do I know that's true? And we're going to look at the footnotes tonight. I'm going to try and give you the why on that. So, there are three main categories of words that I want you to pay attention to. I don't think that I even put the Greek and Hebrew words on the screen. We're not going that nerdy. But the first word is new wine or sweet wine. You'll see this in the Bible quite a bit. The idea is new wine or sweet wine. And so let's just start from the very beginning when the grape is on the vine. The grapes were brought from the vineyards in baskets, were usually spread out for a few days in the sun, the effect of which was to increase their sugar content. The grapes were then placed in wine vats and trodden with bare feet. I almost put a picture or video of I Love Lucy treading. You were thinking it, weren't you? Every single time I talk about this subject, I think about I Love Lucy falling in the grapes. And you take the grapes from the field, you bring them, set them to ripen for a couple days, and then somebody treads them underfoot. Okay, now for the next part. The process of fermentation occurs when yeast, which grows naturally on grape skins, combines with must. I learned this in this study. The juice that comes out of the grape, that I call grape juice, is called must. You're going to see that word a couple times tonight. Not because I just say grape juice. You'll see it in the quotes though. So the yeast which grows on the skin of the grape comes into contact with the grape juice, the must, and the sugar and the yeast form a chemical reaction. The yeast from the grape skins converts the sugars in the must into alcohol. It does something else besides alcohol, carbon dioxide, and that's going to be important in just a minute. So sugar and yeast contact one another and produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. Fermentation would begin when treading exposed the must to the outer skins of the grapes. Within 6 to 12 hours after treading, the must would reach peak fermentation and would continue to ferment for a few days. I told you that I'm going to be doing a good faith study here. And so here's the deal. You're going to read some stuff. I had some books on my shelf downstairs that said, there's this two wine theory. And that is that the wine that you read about in the Bible that causes people to get drunk is alcoholic wine, but the wine that, like Jesus turned water into wine and that Jesus and the apostles drank when they were having the Lord's Supper, that was non-alcoholic wine, like basically Welch's grape juice. Those books are in the trash now. Because when the grape juice comes out of the grape and touches the skin, the yeast on the skin, fermentation starts. The idea of unfermented grape juice is not even possible in this time. And here's just one of those things for you to know that's neat. It was Thomas Welch's grape juice, who invented the antiseptic process to clean the yeast off of the skin of the grapes, and that was after the American Civil War. So unfermented grape juice is not even a possible thing. So if somebody's like, oh no, Jesus turned water into grape juice, that's not good faith Bible study. And I told you we're going to try and do good faith as much as we possibly can in this. So here's the process. The juice comes out of the grape, it touches the skin, and the process of fermentation begins. Turn in your Bible, please, to Matthew chapter 9. We're talking about new wine. That makes a lot of sense, right? The new wine is the new juice that comes out of the grape. And you see on the screen here, ferments almost immediately. In Matthew chapter 9, in verses 14 through 17, new wine is referred to in 3 different places in the Gospels. It's one story, 3 different places. Verse 14, we'll read it for context. Then the disciples of John came to him saying, "Why do the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and the worse tear is made." Here is where you pay attention. "Neither is new wine," remember that's our word, new wine. "Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved." And so here's what you see, why this matters, what we've been talking about. Yeast and sugar combine to create alcohol and carbon dioxide. So you put that new wine in an old wineskin, and the carbon dioxide is going to blow it up like a balloon. But if it's an old wineskin, it's already been stretched to the max. And so it's going to get too blown up and it's going to pop. And so Jesus said, everybody knows this, nobody puts new wine into old wineskins. That's the process that we're talking about here. Incidentally, what Jesus is saying here is old stuff and new stuff don't go together. Why don't your disciples fast like John the Baptist? You do something different. You're doing something new. Because old stuff and new stuff don't go together. That's the main point that he's making. But we saw the wine. Here's the Hebrew word for new wine. And listen, this is one of the reasons why I'm talking about this tonight. This one's really important. That chart, really important. That's our Hebrew word. You find it 37 times in the Old Testament. Of the 37 times that you see the word that means new wine in the Old Testament, in the ESV, 32 of those times is just translated wine. You see why that's something that you would need to know? I'm not standing up here telling you that new wine is equal to Welch's grape juice. That's not true. But new wine has a very small alcoholic content. The alcohol content grows over time. And so when we're talking about new wine, you need to know that we're talking about new wine. It's a very specific word that refers to something very specific. And this is just, to me, this is a tragedy. I am an equal opportunity Bible criticizer. I read from the ESV, and you can see from this chart that the ESV has messed this up big time. In 32 of the 37 times, they just treat it as wine. It's not just wine, it's new wine. It has its own word. It's new wine. Your NIV is going to do the best on that. 34 times you're going to get new wine, 2 times you're just going to get regular wine. Anyway, you can see it. And I'll give you 2 places. I'll give you 2 examples why something like this would be important for you to know. In Judges chapter 9 and verse 13, it's a parable. It's like a story, a parable, where there's this plant that grows, and the plant is talking to itself. And this is important because when you're reading about this subject in like a dictionary or a Bible encyclopedia or something, this is going to be one of the key passages that says, hey, look, God made wine and it's a great blessing for everybody in the world. So Judges 9:13 in the ESV says, "The vine said to them, 'Shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men to go hold sway over the trees?'" And so look, here's the verse that we need to quote on this subject, that wine cheers the heart of God and men. That word is tirash. It's new wine. It should be new wine. The New American Standard and the New King James Version does new wine there. But that's worth so I tell you sometimes blue in my Bible means pay attention to words. Pay attention to that word. That is not just wine, that's new wine. It's that specific word. Here's the definition. I told you I'd try and be fair with some of these things. BDB is Brown, Driver, and Briggs, Hebrew lexicon. Must. What is this word, tirash? Must, which is grape juice, fresh or new wine. DBL is Dictionary of Biblical Literature. Definition of this word. Number 1, new wine, must, grape juice. For example, wine in the beginning stage of fermentation, barely distinguishable with grape juice, distinguishable with grape juice in ability to make someone drunk. It's fermented, but it's barely distinguishable from grape juice with the ability to make someone drunk. I'll give you another example of where you might see this word and somewhere that it's really important that you know this word. Look over at Nehemiah chapter 10. Lots of times wine is used to, it's used in a sacrifice context. It's called a libation, a drink offering. So a person would take a cup of wine, sometimes strong drink, we'll talk about that in a little bit, and they pour the wine out as an offering to God. Well, in this context, one of the things that you do with wine that's technically an offering to God is you give it as a temple tax to the priest in the temple. So Nehemiah chapter 10 and verse 32 gives us our context. We also take on ourselves the obligation to give yearly a third part of a shekel for the service of the house of God. So this whole paragraph is about the temple tax, the tax that you pay to the Levites because they have to eat too. In verse 37, here's part of the tax. To bring the first of our dough, our contributions, the fruit of every tree, the wine, there's our word, the wine, the oil to the priests, to the chambers of the house of God, to bring it to the Levites, the tithes from our ground, for it is the Levites who collect the tithes in all our towns where we labor. In that use, that is new wine. It should be new wine. You should know, everybody should know, that what you give to the Levites is new wine. And you should pay attention to the definition whenever you do that. So we've got new wine. Here's another reason why this matters. Sometimes in the Bible, there's this Hebrew word, tirash. There's another Hebrew word that's found 5 times in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament. That means sweet wine, which is basically referring to the same thing. What is new wine? New wine is sweet wine. It hasn't soured yet. It still tastes good. That's the good wine. It's the stuff that tastes good. So look at this. This is a quote from the Urban's Bible Dictionary. There's no biblical evidence that wine ever consisted of unfermented grape juice. And I'm not trying to tell you that this is unfermented grape juice. When such juice mentioned, it is never called wine. Occasionally, the Bible refers to new wine, that's our word. But this too was fermented and could intoxicate. If you drink enough of it. New wine refers to the first drippings from the vat. It was purer. Pay attention, this matters. It was purer, and because of its higher sugar content, fermented into a more substantial drink. Wine could be graded in this matter. The good stuff is the new wine that hasn't soured yet. Turn over to John chapter 2. Please. In John chapter 2, this is the story where Jesus turns water into wine. And I'm not going to read the whole story. We're going to spend some time down the road, and we're going to talk about this and other examples in the New Testament that are the whatabouts. But one of the whatabouts is this. Look at verse 10. This is what they say after they discover that Jesus has miraculously turned this water into wine at a wedding feast. They said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, but you have kept the good wine until now. Jesus made the good wine. And I think why this conversation matters, why this is important, is because in our context, in our world today, what would you think if I was talking about this drink and I said, Jesus made the good stuff? You would think, high alcohol content, this is the stuff that's going to get you wasted, whatever, That's when we talk about the good stuff, that's what you would think about. The good wine is the new wine that hasn't begun the process of souring and all this. And so, do you think that that should be a part of the conversation? Well, hey, Jesus turned water into wine. In all likelihood, new wine would be part of the conversation. So we're talking about, yes, fermentation has happened, but very small alcohol content. This whole lesson, this whole thing has one point. There's one thing I want to accomplish with you tonight. The person who says, well, look, there's wine in the Bible, and wine is wine is wine is wine. And if there's wine in the Bible and people drink wine in the Bible, then I can drink wine today. It's not an apples to apples conversation. That is not a good statement. That's not a good thing to say, especially when you consider that there are words and descriptions of new wine, which is barely any alcohol content at all. So that's number one. I got something else I want to read to you here. I'll send you the link if you want. There's a guy, Paul Lukakis probably. He wrote a book, Inventing Wine, The History of a Very Vintage Beverage. I did not read that book, and I am not going to read that book. But this author is on an NPR interview. I can send you the link. You can either listen to the interview or you can read the transcript. Here's something from the transcript. The interviewer says this. One of the things I learned from your book is that I probably would not have wanted to drink ancient wine. You make it sound actually pretty putrid. Why did it taste so bad? This is what the author says. It tasted bad because fermented grape juice will oxidize very quickly. And there was no secure way to store the wine, securing meaning keeping air away from it. So inevitably, wine would sour rapidly. And of course, it could only be made once a year at the harvest. So it might have tasted, to our palates, decent in September, but it sure would have tasted bad come spring. So when we're talking about new wine, sweet wine, good wine, the good stuff in John chapter 2, we're talking about very low alcohol content, like probably almost nothing. So that's new wine and sweet wine. I told you about sweet wine. Here's the definition of that. New wine. Oh, I do want to read these. I have two passages for you here. Sweet wine. 2 of the 5 places where this is used in the Bible. You will recognize this. Joel 3:18. In that day the mountains will drip sweet wine, and the hills will flow with milk, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water, and a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord and water the valley of Shittim. This is a picture. In that day, the mountains will drip sweet wine. It's a picture of the grape is so full. God has so bountifully blessed his creation in this coming future day that we're living in right now, that the grape is just dripping the juice out of it. It's so bountiful. It's so good and sugary. It's sweet wine. And so all of this is just to say this. Amos 9 and verse 13. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman will overtake the reaper, the treader of grapes, him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills will flow with it. This thing, new wine, good wine, sweet wine, is not the stuff you're going to find on the shelf at Quick Trip. I said all of that just to give you the why. It's not the same thing you're going to find in the grocery store. Number one. Number 2, I said there's 3 big words tonight. We did 1. Number 2, just the regular word wine. There's more of these used. On this slide it says 139 times in the Old Testament. That should be 141. 141 times in the Old Testament, the most common word for wine. Like almost, this is not totally true, but almost the only word used in the New Testament, 34 times in the New Testament, is just wine. Here's what this word is. The principal Greek word in the New Testament is translated wine. It's used more than 30 times. When used in its non-metaphorical sense, it appears to run the full gamut of meaning. Wine refers to all wine. New wine, middle wine, strong drink, wine. From grape juice, usually qualified by the adjective new, to the fully fermented alcoholic beverage. So let me tell you what I did. If you're sitting there thinking to yourself, we talk a whole sermon talking about words. Hold on. I did something really kind for you. Instead of reading all of those 140, 50, 60, 75, 175 wine references in the Bible, what I did was I copied and pasted most of them, all of them I think, into a Word document. And I sorted each one. I read each one in its context and I sorted it into positive context, negative context, drunk context, all of this. And it's already posted online. So if you go to simplychristians.com, that's our church website, sermons, and you find this sermon, tomorrow, the audio of this sermon will be there and the YouTube link will be there, but there's also a Word document attached to that file. And you can read all 10 pages or whatever it is of these sorted into the categories if you want. So I'm not going to do it in a sermon. You're welcome. But you can do that. I want you to know that it's there. And I really think you should look it through. If you're going to really come at this subject and say, I want to know something about this subject, you need to look at that document. But the context matters. The amount of alcoholic content which could be achieved by fermentation was not high when compared with what can be attained through modern methods of distillation. And modern methods of distillation are totally unknown to the ancient world. The distillation process that makes hard liquor what we do today wasn't even discovered until the 1100s. And so that's not even on the table. Thus, the ordinary table drink would have had a low percentage of alcohol in it, even with this word wine. And so look, here's something worth thinking about. Dictionary of Biblical Language, again, here's a definition. I'm not just cherry picking. These are just pulled right out of lexicons, the dictionaries that I have on my Bible software. What's the definition? Wine, a naturally processed fermented grape juice in excess amounts can cause drunkenness. The alcohol content is so low that if you're going to get drunk, you have to be trying to get drunk. You have to drink a lot of it. Remember the quote that we read last week? It's going to affect your bladder long before it affects your mind. That's just a definition of wine. In excess amounts, it can cause drunkenness. The point, what you have at the grocery store is not the same thing that we read about in the Bible. Last word. I said 3 words. The last word is strong drink. Or in some of your Bibles, I think it'll say intoxicating drink. This is, if we're going to use English words to describe this is what we would call the good stuff. It's still not a high alcohol content compared to what you find at the grocery store, but strong drink. The biblical attitude towards strong drink is much more negative than its attitude towards wine. When we talk about this word, strong drink, when we talk about the kind of wine that is what you would expect somebody to get drunk from, of the 22 places it's used in the Old Testament, only one of those places is used in a positive way in referring to human consumption. Sometimes you pour it out to God. That's not human consumption. The human consumption, it's the Proverbs 31 example that says, give strong wine to the guy who is perishing. And we'll talk about that next time that we do this lesson. But strong wine is not a positive thing in the Bible. I want to show you this. I keep telling you, this is the reason why I'm talking about this. I think you have to know this. I beat the ESV up earlier. Now the ESV gets a pat on the back. The ESV did this one the way it should be. Strong drink. New American Standard, strong drink. One time they call it liquor. I don't like that. I looked up the definition of liquor. Liquor is like something that has gone through the distillation process, not even invented in the Bible time. That should not say liquor. But when you come to the NIV, 10 times the NIV says fermented drink. Okay. The grape juice that comes out of the grape and touches the yeast on the skin is fermented drink. That should not be. 11 times it says beer. The New King James Version says intoxicating drink and strong drink. That's right. This 7 times similar drink, it's similar to wine. So that would be like the beer thing. Something similar to wine. Here's what you need to know about this word, strong drink. I think this will answer any questions that you might have. Look at this. The word strong drink or any intoxicating liquor comes from a root meaning to drink deeply or to be drunk. The word strong drink comes from the word that means drunkenness. And so you can see why it would be called strong drink, or especially, maybe better, intoxicating drink. It is a generic term applied to all fermented liquids, however obtained. So I don't care if you want to talk about this with wine or something that comes from grain or barley like beer. If it's strong, intoxicating, it's strong drink. Intoxicating drink. And this word is not spoken of favorably in the Old Testament. Here's something for you. Though fermented wine was drunk in Bible times, the Bible approved of wine drinking, one needs to remember that the alcoholic content was much less than that of the wine today. What is used today is not the wine of the New Testament. Probably you've heard me say that a few times tonight. That's the main point. Therefore, Christians ought not drink wine, beer, or other alcoholic beverages, for the stuff on the shelf at Walmart and Quick Trip would be categorized as strong or intoxicating drink by biblical standards. What we have on our grocery store shelves would be called strong drink. And that's not okay in the Bible. It's not okay to say, oh, look, wine in the Bible. No, strong drink is not okay. I think since we're talking about it, I'll just throw this one up there because it's like this is as good a place as any as we're going to have a chance to talk about this. Remember when Jesus was hanging on the cross and they handed him up a sponge of sour wine? Or I think the second time it's mentioned, Matthew 27. I think the second one's in Matthew 27. 27:48. The first time he didn't take it. The second time he did. The second time it's called wine mixed with myrrh. If you just let wine be, eventually it's going to turn into vinegar. It's going to turn sour, and it's just going to turn into vinegar. If you mix that sour wine with myrrh, it turns into like, what's the word that's used? Anesthetic properties. One thing that I don't know the answer to is, when Jesus was hanging on the cross and they handed him up the sour wine, was it an act of mercy to say, here, drug yourself to get through this horrible thing on the cross? Or was it an act of cruelty to say, oh, look, that guy's thirsty, let's give him some vinegar to drink? Probably the second. If you're going to crucify someone, probably the second. But it's if we're talking about wine, this is another word that's used for wine, sour wine and mixed wine, and that's where you're seeing that's what it's going to look like. Okay, I'll wrap this up. I'm on the home stretch. All of the things I've already mentioned tonight that make alcohol today what it is, the processes weren't even invented in the Bible time. Add extra sugar, add extra yeast, because sugar and yeast is what produces the alcohol. You know, these people thought that God was making it. Didn't understand the chemical reaction between yeast on the skin and sugar in the grape juice, regulating the oxygen levels, distillation process. Listen to this. I'm going to go back to that interview that I told you about. I got to find my spot. I got a lot of pages of notes tonight. I don't normally have this many pages of notes. I want to go back to the interview. In thinking about the modern process, this is what the author of that book said. Distilled beverages have one great advantage over wine. They don't spoil. So gin is gin, and it lasts for a very long time. Whereas, if you open a bottle of wine today, if you open the bottle of wine, in a few days, it's going to taste different. In a week, it's not going to taste very good. In a month, it's going to be vinegar, which is the problem that haunts wine. And so the interviewer asked this question. At some point, you have to have a hybrid where wines are being mixed with spirits to get fortified wine. So what are we talking about? What drinks are we talking about? And this is what he says. Fortified wines begin in the 18th century, that's the 1700s, which I think of as really the period where modern wine starts emerging. Whenever you have these technologies in the 1700s, that's where you really get to start to see the origins of what is on the grocery store shelves today, where modern wine starts emerging, and they have the advantage over still wines because of the additional distillate. Here is usually a clear brandy that can travel well or something like that. And so, the main point, you don't just read the Bible and say, oh, look, people drink wine in the Bible, so I can drink wine today. Context matters. It's the context that we've been talking about. Here are two last quotes that make this point. While it is undeniable that some people in the Bible drink alcoholic beverages, we must keep in mind, wine on the mind. We must keep in mind that the beverages these men and women consumed were not the kinds of alcoholic beverages people consume today. You see, I'm not just making it up, like it comes from somewhere. The alcohol content of beverages referred to in the Bible was considerably lower than many of today's alcoholic beverages. The distillation process that produces today's high alcohol content drink was not yet developed. And then lastly, this is what we started off with. In concluding this brief article, I would like to emphasize 2 points. First, it's important to try and understand the biblical text and the context in which it was written. Before we ask, what does biblical text mean for us today, we must ask, what did it mean to them originally? Second, there is a striking difference between the drinking of alcoholic beverages today and the drinking of wine in New Testament times. It's not an apples to apples conversation. And I'm not even done yet. In the next lesson, we're going to take this wine that we've been talking about, and we're going to start to mix it with water. And I'll show you why I say that. Normally, the higher part of the mixture was water to a less part wine. So you take a low content alcohol, and then you mix it with more water than wine. It's not what you read about. Or what you have on the grocery store today. You know what this ultimately is? This is the last thing I'll refer to, and I'll be done. Remember in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15 what Paul told Timothy to do? He told him to rightly divide the word of truth. To be fair to the biblical text and to read it in its context and to use it in the way that it was intended to be used. I don't expect most of you will remember anything from this lesson. And that's fine. I just want you to walk away with this one thing. Well, there's wine in the Bible, so I can drink wine. That's not a good statement. And now you know why. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, at the end of every lesson, we offer the opportunity to become one. If you're here and you don't know what you need to do in order to be a Christian, I'm happy to talk with you. Anybody here can talk with you about that. If you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, you're ready to repent of your sins, to confess Jesus as King before this group of witnesses. Jesus is King and I'm going to serve him, to die to yourself and be baptized in the watery grave. And when you come up out of that watery grave, to walk in newness of life. We'd like to help you with that. Come forward now as we stand and sing the invitation song.